Hello and welcome to Money Mind's Budget Special. Singapore's Finance Minister Lawrence Wong has delivered a budget that he says rolls out the first installment of the Forward Singapore program. That's a roadmap for the country's future. Well, our panel of guests is here to break down what it all means for you. And I want to start off by asking you, what was really the highlight? What stood out for you from the budget?
For me, it's a very comprehensive budget addressing immediate concerns like cost of living, raising family, to also medium term, like helping our company to be more competitive, to restructure, to reform, and then the long term, to continue to grow.
KC, what was your highlight?
Well, for me, it was a clear recognition that we can no longer rely on the skills that we learned at school to carry us through the rest of our career. So there's a need to relearn, unlearn, and pick up new skills. So I think that message was very clearly conveyed through this budget, and the government is leaning heavily to support it.
This is actually seen through the generous allowances that the government is actually doling out while you actually go and study further as well. So it's quite a large amount, 3,000 up to 3,000 a month for 24 months, and that's really quite generous.
We'll talk more about these measures later. First, I want to talk about what's on everyone's mind, and that's namely cost of living pressures. What's your take on the enhanced assurance package?
I think it's great. More subsidies. No one's going to say no to that, especially with the increase in living. Of course, if you ask any Singaporean on the road, they're always going to say more is better. But I think it is a significant increase over what already we have seen that was given out last year.
And we also saw, Amy, that this year the measures are very much more targeted to ensure that specific groups of people are not left out.
Yeah, so it's, as we said, very comprehensive, and they are clearly a response to feedback they have heard from the Singaporean. And being the first installment to responding to the Forward Singapore exercise, and the report was launched last year, it's very clear. The government is responding to the feedback. And you realize that they are addressing a lot of feedback from different groups of Singaporean and businesses.
I also want to ask you about changes to CPF. We saw, again, higher contribution rates for seniors, some changes to the special account. Why do you think this move has come about, and what's the impact?
We can speculate a lot of things, but I think one clear objective that DPM was actually highlighting is about retirement and really addressing the aging population. We have already so many packages for different seniors, and the latest one is a Majula for young seniors. It really shows that our population is aging rapidly. So the emphasis on proper retirement and to be self-sufficient, I think that message is very clear. So this announcement to me is to highlight that we need to be sufficiently prepared for your retirement.
KC, key to reducing costs for consumers is also reducing costs for businesses. Do you think they received enough help on this front?
Well, the new enterprise support package, $1.3 billion, I thought goes quite a long way, but it's addressing short-term cost pressures, which everybody has to deal with, including businesses. But I think what's equally more important is the emphasis on the long term. How do we make sure our industries and companies are competitive? And that's the only way we can deliver sustainable growth.
I also want to ask you about help for families and encouraging parenthood. Are we doing enough to incentivize couples?
Should ask her.
I mean, as any young couple would say, of course, just like the amount of GST vouchers, more is better. So I think what they have actually clearly identified already is that there is that specific segment in terms of preschool support that's really needed. As most of us know, preschool fees are actually a lot higher than actually public primary education. So I think a lot of parents are probably facing concerns in the cost when it comes to preschool education, and that's why the measures this time around are pretty much focused on that.
I want to pick up on what you spoke earlier, KC, with DPM mentioning that these are short-term measures, these are not permanent solutions. Do you expect such measures to be sort of tapered off in the years to come?
I would think so. This DPM specifically mentioned that inflationary pressures, cost of living, cost of doing business have increased over the last few years, and I presume that this budget is aimed to address specifically those concerns. Once we get that under control, we should taper off. I don't think it's good to have us continuously expecting handouts and goodies every budget. Much better that we are able to survive on our own and be competitive.
And I guess speaking on that, right, he did emphasize throughout his budget speech that this is not sustainable. It's a short-term measure, but Singaporeans should look forward to long-term growth. And I like it when he said, we need to continue to grow. And Singapore has what we have today is because of the high growth in the past 50 years, and we need to continue to grow. So I think that signals the direction that the Singapore government is trying to lead us.
But also adding to that, that's also why some parts of the budget also address the future of Singapore, whether it's in terms of getting companies to go sustainable or focusing in on new industries like AI and putting money towards that. So those are measures that are already being put in the budget, looking towards the future so that we can be less dependent on expecting handouts every year.
Still to come, a look at a major revamp of the Skills Future program and how you could benefit from it. Welcome back to Money Mind's Budget Special. Now, the upskilling and reskilling of Singaporean workers was a key focus of this year's budget. We also heard the DPM talk about temporary support for what he called involuntarily unemployed people. What do you make of this?
Well, I guess involuntarily unemployed refers to retrenched workers. And we'll have to wait to see the details, but considering that there were more than 2 times the number of workers retrenched last year compared to the year before, about over 14,000. I think it would be welcome. The key, as DPM mentioned, is not to see this as a long-term support, but really something to help them transit into more meaningful jobs.
Yeah, I'm glad that he actually addressed that, even though details will come later, because this top of mind, especially for people who are displaced, and usually they might be at the age group where they find it very hard to upskill, reskill themselves, and to find alternative job in the short term. So it is comforting that he is saying something, but we are waiting for the details.
Kai Lun, what did you think of this announcement?
I think it was also maybe very deliberately chosen involuntary unemployed for a reason, because other than people who are getting retrenched, I think there will also be segments of society that will find it hard to even find jobs, especially with all the disruption that's going on. So I think that's amongst the considerations, and we'll really only find out when we actually learn of the actual details that come out after that.
Well, the cornerstone of help for workers is really a significant revamp of Skills Future. Does this go far enough for you, Amy?
At least it's a start, it's an enhancement. We have the Skills Future credit scheme for a while. And I think what is very welcoming is that it's more targeted this year. Because in the past, as we all know, a lot of people use it for hobbies. But if you really want to upskill our Singaporean to be more fit for purpose for the future, we need to be very targeted. And I think increasing it to $4,000 is very welcome, but we are again waiting for details on what will be approved on that list.
I guess just to pick up on Amy's point, the $4,000 and targeted at those above 40 sends a message that maybe they are the ones who are more in danger and therefore need to reskill. And I think the other point about being targeted is also for qualifying programs. And we'll have to wait to see what those programs are. But I would imagine that it relates to matching the jobs that have been created today versus the skills that Singaporeans have.
Kind of, you'll have to wait to access this Skills Future program.
As a younger Singaporean who's not quite yet 40, I guess it's a bit disappointing that we don't have access to that yet. But DPM has reassured us that once we get to 40, we will definitely have access to those funds. But I think the significant amount, like what Amy said, of $4,000 signifies that the government's really serious about it. Because I think with the previous amounts of just 2 tranches of 500, it's not sustainable, not substantive enough to actually be well-trained enough to actually switch careers. So a lot of people actually have been doing that out of their own pocket. So with this support, I think those who are considering it but maybe looking at their family finances, they will be definitely giving it a second think right now.
Yeah. And I do feel that it's actually very important, not just to address the short-term involuntary unemployment, but it's actually for the long term, because Singapore asset is really about people. And if we want to be competitive, especially even DPM Wong said that a lot of our neighboring countries are also stepping up. The other developed countries are also looking at the same kind of investment that we are looking for. So what can we differentiate ourselves? It's really our people. So if our people are upskilled to the right level, I think that is our strength.
And that justifies our higher costs as well.
That's right.
But I did want to pick up a point in this Skills Future package, which seems to be primarily supporting, as we mentioned, those who are above 40, but also supporting them to gain a second diploma, as opposed to more learning on the job and upskilling for specific jobs. So maybe that's something that we should watch out for in future budgets, because preparing for your next job doesn't necessarily require you to go into an academic institution.
We see a huge focus on helping ITE graduates who want to pursue a diploma, 5,000 and then 10,000 to help them out. Why do you think the focus on this particular group?
Maybe it's based on statistics because of their wage at the moment. There is a big gap between ITE graduates and the diploma graduate. So maybe at least it's an initial step to try to bridge that gap and then take it forward if required.
And this is a specific program targeted at those below 30. And really, maybe you are right. I mean, we can speculate, but it seems to be helping them close that wage gap. And also the top up to their CPF ordinary account addresses the opportunity cost for them to go and pursue this diploma.
So I think it's all just part of the government's efforts also to close the wage gap that exists by giving them incentives. They won't think so much about, what is the opportunity cost, like what was being said about going out to get a second job rather than spending that time in academia. And it's actually to the betterment of their long-term future as well. I mean, we still very much are looking at qualifications at this point of time still. So investing that small amount of time, giving up that potential wage will go a long way in terms of them being able to continue to remain employed in the longer term and with good wages.
And for all this to happen, businesses need to lean in as well, right? The onus is not just entirely on the individual.
Yeah, I think companies need to be supportive and recognize the need for their employees to acquire new skills. Some of it may be formal learning, others could be learning on the job, and there are different programs that are available. I thought one of the things that the enterprise financing package included extension of Skills Future credit for employers.
It's providing them more information as well, because a lot of this SME in particular, they're really struggling, right, with the day-to-day and trying to survive in terms of their businesses. Having the credit may still not be top of the mind, so it is actually going to be welcoming for their education to share with them that if you upskill your employee, it's actually good for your business in the long term.
So this 1 year extension, probably more work can be done in terms of education for the companies to actually understand. And for, I guess, employees themselves to actually go be asking their bosses, hey, I learned that this program, could I use it to upskill myself for the betterment of myself as well as the company?
Yeah, and we believe that 44% of the skills that we have today will be obsolete in the next 5 years. Then we need to figure out a way to gain those new skills. And I think not all of what we know today will be obsolete. So we have to figure out which parts can be done, for instance, by technology and AI, and which parts we can continue to do, and where we should be upgrading and upskilling ourselves.
Or where we can learn how to harness AI to be better at our jobs instead of letting AI take over our jobs.
And if you're a young Singaporean who's not yet 40 and who did not graduate from ITE, you should still be thinking about this.
I think all age groups should be thinking about this. I would actually encourage that people at all ages just be prepared that you can be disrupted anytime. So why don't you disrupt ahead of time?
I mean, of course, those who are older than 40 get the benefit of having that additional incentive in terms of money to be able to do all of this. But like what was said, it should be always so. If you are in a small, medium enterprise company, do know that your company does have access to some of these funds. Go forward and ask. And not just these funds, there are funds also that are being given up to 70% of courses if actually companies sponsor their employees to actually go for such courses. So there is quite a lot of funding available, maybe not just through Budget 2024, but even in the regular schemes that the government already has.
And at the World Economic Forum in Davos recently, there was talk of a new term called FOBO, F-O-B-O. Now, we all know about FOMO, which is fear of missing out, but FOBO means fear of becoming obsolete. And I think that's very real today as you look at the skills. People are asking not what AI can do, but what AI cannot do. So, but our skills becoming obsolete is not the same thing as us becoming obsolete. And therefore, we need to ensure that we take ownership, build up career resilience by acquiring new skills. And this budget gives us new tools to be able to do that.
So plenty more to discuss, but still ahead, we'll take a look at longer-term challenges for Singapore's future. Welcome back to Money Mind's Budget Special. We're talking now about longer-term challenges Singapore faces. I thought it was interesting that DPM spent a considerable amount of time talking about energy security, for example. Are not longer-term challenges, you think?
Well, I think, firstly, we have made our sustainability targets clear, and we need to be able to meet them. And secondly, we are disadvantaged when it comes to alternative energy options. We have little wind, don't have enough land for space for solar. So I think it's encouraging that we're exploring other options. DPM mentioned geothermal. In the longer term, potentially nuclear. We're going to import green electricity. I hope that we can look at this the same way that we did our water shortage and turn that into an opportunity and a strength for Singapore.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we've done it before. We are limited in resources, but we thrive by seeing what we have and what we can do to make sure that we still have a place in the global world. In terms of climate concern, it is everywhere. But like what Casey said, we need to be competitive. And being sustainable and being green is so important to be competitive, because our business partners and the other countries are so expecting us to play the game, and you have to play your part in the climate concern.
And that's important even for SMEs. It's
Yeah.
not just for bigger businesses, right?
Yeah, for them to be the partner, the preferred partner in the supply chain selection, they have to play their part. Otherwise, they can be actually eliminated.
We spoke about funding future budgets, and DPM said we have to prepare for more spending because of the aging population, because of decarbonization, or whether it's to strengthen social spending. He did mention that some of the last two GST hikes have helped to pre-fund this. Is it enough?
So since I'm the tax professional here, you're all looking at me. GST hike did bring some increased revenue, and even last year was a surprise. The corporate tax revenue also had gone up. Now that we are introducing changes to our tax regime because of the BEPS Pillar 2, there may be short-term increase, but that is not expected to be the main source of our revenue, because that should be channeled back to making Singapore competitive. So I would say that in the long run, we are still not going to depend on tax revenue, but more importantly is Singapore being competitive.
I think the only
Yeah.
way we can sustain that is to grow and be
Yes.
competitive and attract the investments, which leads to good jobs and economic growth. Otherwise, we won't see real wages growing, which is what everybody wants, I presume.
Which is also why the government is, the budget is actually going to be focusing on things like cybersecurity and AI, these new areas where there's a lot of demand for us to also be as a nation more competitive compared to the nations around us. There are obvious lacking of talents in these areas locally. So in the past few years, we have looked at a lot of talent overseas for these areas, but I think more and more Singapore is realizing the need that we need to grow our own talent, and that's why the emphasis of putting money there to train up more people to be able to function in these areas.
But it's an interesting shift that we're thinking about AI now, because AI is not a conventional industry as we know it. In the past, Singapore did bet on specific industries, whether it's electronics, chemicals, aerospace. But AI is really an enabler cutting across industries. And to succeed well, I think we need to build up the capabilities in that space, but also understand how it relates to specific domains. And that $1 billion top-up that DPM announced will probably drive towards that.
That's why he was saying that it's not about ChatGPT.
It's not about
So he didn't want us to
ChatGPT.
think in silo, but it's broader than that.
So it'll be interesting to see how the different industries will be impacted by this $1 billion in terms of AI. So it might not just be towards fueling the industry, but even enabling different industries to embrace AI more innovatively to be able to preserve us as a competitive nation.
And one particular segment would be the SMEs, because I think it's very tough for them to try and take something and adapt it. So they need something which is ready off the shelf, and DPM alluded to that in the sense of readily available solutions for SMEs to take advantage of.
And that has always been a very strong feedback from SME. So I'm very glad that this budget here actually say that it's proven solution so that you can plug and play, because that's so important for the smaller SME.
Okay, it's time to take stock now, and I want to ask all of you, what worked for you in this budget and what perhaps did not work quite as well?
So as someone who maybe doesn't benefit as much, I think people my age, those in their 20s to 30s, were looking to see what they could do. I do think everyone in this age group is looking to actually upgrade their skills as well. So I guess it is a tad disappointing that we are not getting that until we turn 40. But that's also not a reason for us to stop being able to find ways to upskill ourselves and continue to be competitive. So it's a good signal to actually also know what areas the country will be investing in, so that we can look at those areas as specific, maybe indicators of how we can go and learn new skills in order to be able to continue to be employable very much in this new economy.
So what I like is that it's a clear response to the Forward Singapore exercise, because there's no point doing an exercise when you don't respond to the feedback. So being a first installment, I'm actually excited to see the future installment response to that exercise. The other thing that I'm actually very heartened is that there's a long-term strategy. So at least for many of us, we know that where we want to take Singapore to, we want to play in the space of AI, we want to play in the space of digitalization, sustainability. These are all the big bets. And I think there is a clear goal that Singapore government want to lead the way.
Well, firstly, I feel very privileged to be a young senior. But I think what worked for me in this budget is the fact that it's comprehensive and yet targeted. It supports upskilling and reskilling, albeit for those who are over 40. There are two components that I would like to see. One is perhaps recognition that reskilling and upskilling should be across different age groups. And secondly, that it need not take place in formal academic institutions. It could take place in the workplace, as long as it's related to an upgrading of skills.
Okay, and just quickly to wrap up our discussion, when we look at the budget as a whole, as we transition to a new leadership, what sort of paradigm shifts do you see?
I'm not sure that there was a significant paradigm shift, but what stood out for me was the need to stay competitive in the long term, and that's the only real way for Singapore to sustain as a small country.
Yeah, what stood out for me is that when he announced that we continue to invest in defense, in healthcare, education, that has not deviated. So even as we shift to the new government leaders, these are important pillars of the social compact, and I'm glad that it continues to be taken care of.
Yeah, I guess it's just a reassurance that while there's change, yet there's nothing changing in terms of where the leadership is bringing Singapore to be, to continue to make us a nation where people live well and are going to be able to work well.
And that brings us to the end of this Money Mind Budget Special. Thank you to my guests, Personal Finance Coach Seow Kai Lun, Amy Ang, EY Tax Partner, and KC Yeoh, CEO of Temus. Thanks for being with us. And thank you for watching. And if you have any more questions about how the budget affects you, do get in touch with us at this email.